February 1876, when Karolina was returning home to her village, crossing the ice of a frozen river when she fell. Some say she fell through the ice, nearly drowning, but being pulled to safety at the last moment, although other sources claim she tripped and hit her head, knocking a tooth loose and resulting in a toothache. Whatever the truth, she did make it home safely to the modest cottage she lived in with her family, but with a sore face and a toothache. Her father looked her over when she came over, and despite bruising and scrapes, she appeared perfectly fine. Then Karolina's toothache got worse, and she suffered from excruciating headaches, out of the ordinary for her. Her father, a local fisherman, and her mother thought it was down to witchcraft. It was 1876, superstition was high, and the village of Okno was quite isolated. Knowing there was nothing they could do that evening, given their remote location and financial strain, Karolina was told to go to bed and see what took place the following day. However, when she fell asleep, she did not wake up. In fact, she would not awake for decades. She went to sleep at 14 and not to return to the waking world until age 32. Her parents were desperate to wake her up, but couldn't afford a doctor at the time. They tried a number of methods to bring her back to consciousness, including a hot flame across her skin and even pricking her with needles, first on her body and eventually under her fingernails. It was no use. Karolina was still fast asleep. When their daughter did not wake up after a few days and they were unable to rouse her, they sent for medical help. In the meantime, as the days passed, they took to force-feeding their daughter 2 glasses of milk and sugar a day. And when they finally had a doctor come look at her, he would tell them that she was in some sort of coma. Although why was she in a coma was anyone's guess. The doctor kept up to date on the case, and as the months stretched into a year and the girl continued her slumber, he implored the medical community to try and figure out what was going on. Other doctors made their way out to the secluded island to see Karolina for themselves, and it was noted that her hair and fingernails seemed to have not grown during the entire episode, and that she had not really lost any weight, despite subsisting on only a mere 2 glasses of milk a day. In fact, she was in surprisingly good shape. Her muscles seemed to have not really atrophied at all. It was as if Karolina was in some sort of state of suspended animation. In July of 1882, a full 6 years after she had gone into her mysterious sleep, Karolina was still sleeping away, and her concerned, burdened parents had her hospitalized in the city of Askarasham, where doctors tried to revive her with electroshock therapy to no avail. Frustrated doctors would throw up their hands and diagnose her with a severe neuropsychiatric disorder called dementia paralytica, also known as general paralysis of the insane or paralytic dementia, but no one could be sure, and it is unlikely that she actually suffered from this. The family was told there was not much to be done except wait and hope for the best. And so they waited, and waited some more. Years passed, seasons changed, the world evolved around them. Family members passed away, and Karolina slept, occasionally moaning or tossing and turning, and even sleepwalking or mumbling in her sleep on occasion, but never fully waking up. The only time she ever showed any sort of true reaction to the outside world was when she was seen to cry when her brother passed away in 1907. Yet, she did this even as she remained in her strange comatose state. Karolina's mother would also die during this ordeal, and a full-time caregiver was hired to tend to her. This maid was baffled that Karolina's hair always seemed to be clean and that it never grew, nor did her nails. She also noticed that sometimes when she left and came back, pieces of candy she had brought with her would be missing, leading her to be suspicious of the whole thing. Yet Karolina would never rouse from her sleep, no matter what anyone did. After years of this, it was also rather odd that the woman did not seem to be aging normally, looking much younger than she should have, as if her whole metabolism had been slowed down. This would continue for 32 years, until one day she just suddenly woke up. On April 3, 1908, Karolina suddenly and without warning sat up in bed and began crying. The maid entered the room expecting this to be just another sleepwalking episode, but was astonished to see that Karolina was alert, awake, and looking about the room in confusion. The family was immediately called to her bedside, but the young woman seemed to not recognize her now grown brothers and was not in a state of shock and panic. Over the next few days, she did not say much and showed an almost painful reaction to sunlight, but with some difficulty she began speaking again. Under questioning, it was found that she had no memory of anything since falling into her long sleep except for half-remembered dreams and nightmares. And when doctors examined her, they were puzzled that she seemed to have no negative side effects from being bedridden for decades. Although she was technically now in her late 40s, she looked more like she was in her early 20s. She was subjected to mental tests by psychiatrists and was found to have full possession of all her cognitive abilities and intelligence. Although she was having difficulty adjusting to the world that had changed so much around her. The news got out about what the media was calling the Sovereign'skan pa Okno, or the Sleeper of Okno, and Karolina was soon a minor celebrity. Of course, there were skeptics. After all, how could a woman remain asleep in bed for over 3 decades with no ill effects to show for it, and having only subsisted on 2 glasses of sweetened milk per day? The idea was that her family had been in on it, and the whole perpetual sleep thing had been a ruse to keep her hidden away from the world. Another idea posited by the Swedish psychiatrist Harold Fraderstrom was that she had suffered some sort of deep psychosis state rather than a full hibernation. But that still didn't explain why she looked so incredibly young. Karolina would end up leading a content and normal life right up into her death in 1950 at the age of 88, always insisting that it was all true and taking any secrets she had to the grave with her. We are left to wonder, what happened to Karolina Olsson? Interestingly, there have been other similar cases to hers, although not nearly as dramatic. In 2012, a 15-year-old British teen by the name of Stacey Comerford fell into a deep sleep that she would not wake for from 2 months. The cause was speculated to be a condition known as Kleine-Levin syndrome, or Sleeping Beauty syndrome, but it is still poorly understood. Was Olsson perhaps suffering from a particularly spectacular case of this? How do we explain her ability to come out of it without any significant mental or physical health effects, or her lack of aging during the ordeal? We will probably never know, and the case of the Swedish Sleeping Beauty remains an unexplained historical oddity and possible medical marvel that we may never understand or have the answers for. On a spring morning in 1856, Samuel Cox set out to do some hunting from his family's small house in an area known as Spruce Hollow. When he returned later, he and his wife discovered that their two sons, Joseph, age 5, and George, age 7, were missing. Mrs. Cox thought maybe the boys followed their dad hunting without him knowing and may have gotten lost in the woods. George and Joseph were never to be seen alive again. The search for the boys lasted 2 weeks and culminated in a gruesome discovery beneath a large tree on the shady banks of Gypsy Creek. And had it not been for a prophetic dream, the whereabouts of George and Joseph Cox might still remain a mystery. This story is fact, not fiction. It isn't a tall tale nor urban legend. The story of the disappearance of George and Joseph Cox is horrendous, alarming, and draws much skepticism given how it played out. The strange tale of the lost children of the Alleghenies began on the morning of April 24th, 1856, when the boys followed their father into the woods. Samuel Cox, who had just finished breakfast inside the family's primitive log cabin in Spruce Hollow, grabbed his rifle after he heard his dog barking. The dog had managed to tree some small animal, and Samuel, desperate to put meat on the table for a family dinner, bolted from the cabin. He was so eager to shoot the trapped animal that he failed to notice that George and Joseph had followed him outside. This area of Pennsylvania was densely wooded. Even to this day, the woods in that part of the mountains are heavily forested and deep. You can easily be lost in them. The boys' mother, Susanna, thought the boys had just gone out after their father and that they would return home shortly. When Samuel turned up at home alone, no boys in sight, that worry and fear started to set in. The parents realized their 2 boys really were gone, somewhere in the woods. Samuel scoured the area around his house, but could not locate them. He asked neighbors in the surrounding area for help, but after a long search, no trace of them could be found. Hunters, trappers, neighbors, and everyone from far and near joined in the search. As time went on, over 100 people were involved in the search for the missing boys. Large fires were built on ridgetops in hopes that the children would see one of the fires and make their way to safety. The searchers came up with one theory as to the boys' location. They set their sights on a nearby stream called Bob's Creek. The stream was gushing with melted snow from the change of seasons. They figured it was near impossible for the boys to have crossed the other side without drowning. Unfortunately, the search didn't bear any fruit. They were unable to find the boys, not even a trace of them. On April 26th, suspicion fell on Samuel and Susanna Cox. It was thought that they might have their children in hope of gathering donations from a sympathetic population. However, the family's cabin and garden were searched, but no bodies were found. The local lore is thick with speculation on the boys' demise. A witch from Somerset County and the Dowser were even consulted in searching for the remains. But the Dowser found nothing, and the witch, despite claiming to know the children's location, led a search team through the woods for hours without finding anything. According to the legend, the night after the disappearance, a local farmer, Jacob DeBert, heard about the missing children and remarked to his wife that he wished to be able to dream of their location. On May 2nd, 1856, he had a dream in which he walked a path through the woods, past a dead deer, a child's shoe, and a fallen birch tree, and eventually to a corpse of birch trees in a small ravine. Here he found the bodies of the Cox boys. the dream reoccurred on 2 following nights. The farmer told no one but his wife about the dream. However, he felt that the dream was prophetic, and on May 7th, he told his brother-in-law, Harrison Wysong, who recognized elements from DeBert's dream. Thus, the 2 men decided to make a search, culminating in the discovery of the bodies, just as the dream had described. Under birch trees in a small ravine reached along a track with a dead deer, a child's shoe, and a fallen birch. Jacob DeBert and his brother-in-law, Harrison Wysong, were remembered as heroes, and the day the boys' bodies were found, the church bells rang through many communities throughout the Allegheny Mountains. Once the boys' bodies were returned to the Cox home, church and school bells started ringing from Pavia to Bedford to Altoona, announcing the sad news of the boys being found. Joseph and George Cox, the lost children of the Alleghenies, were buried in Mount Union Cemetery. In 1906, to mark the mysterious tragedy's 50th anniversary, the community raised money to create a monument to the lost boys. In 1910, they had finally raised enough funds, and a monument was erected on the site where the brothers' bodies were found over 50 years earlier. In recent years, visitors have started leaving kids' toys at the monument. The boys probably wouldn't have had much use for toy cars and stuffed animals in 1856, but it probably serves to accentuate the tragedy and break your heart if you visit the monument. The city of Hamelin, Germany, has a long-standing summer tradition. Every Sunday during the vernal equinox, locals gather in the old town center to retell a lasting tale that takes place in the very city. Deep within the children's section of the local library is an old, dusty copy of classic fairy tales. Behind the faded cover live stories of heroism, nobility, and true love. Stories that eagerly fill the minds of young dreamers everywhere. However, dwelling amongst the once upon a times and happily ever afters is a far more sinister tale of rat infestation, broken promises, and the disappearance of an entire city's children. Among those darker tales is the story of the Pied Piper, also known as the Piper of Hamelin. It's a classic fairy tale that only few have bothered to study the origins of. In fact, most that do know the story consider simply a figment of the imagination, a musing tale meant to stir and leave the audience with an important lesson, never knowing that there is a truth to the Pied Piper, some basis in reality. The most well-known version of the children's story, which was written in 1857, talks about the Hamelin townspeople of 1284. This town was facing a rat infestation, and a piper, dressed in a coat of many colored bright cloth, appeared. This piper promised to get rid of the rats in return for a payment, to which the townspeople agreed. Although the piper got rid of the rats by leading them away with his music, the people of Hamelin reneged on their promise. The furious piper left, vowing revenge. On July 26th of that same year, the piper returned and led the children away, never to be seen again, just as he did the rats. However, the original version of the story, written 45 years earlier, did not come with the same happy ending. The town's children were lured away to a cave where they were closed until the end of times. The only child that survived in the earlier version of the story was a child who was handicapped. Therefore, the child was unable to keep up with the musically entranced children. Thus, that one child's life was spared. There are many people who picked up this story, writing their own version of the events, right from the very time it happened. The most well-known of all the stories about what took place in Hamelin on the 26th of June, 1284, are those by the Grimm brothers. They stray far away from simple fantasy. On the interior wall of a Hamelin city house, there reads an inscription dating back to the 1600s. It reads, "In the year of 1284, on the day of Saints John and Paul, on June 26th, by a piper, clothed in many kinds of colors, 130 children born in Hamelin were seduced and lost at a place of execution nearby Koppen. The loss of 130 children is without question a near fatal blow to a town, to the population, to a chance at survival. It is remarkable that Hamelin is still standing after that. The harrowing tale of over 100 children's lives on in this plaque, all because of a supposed piper that led children to their death in the Calvary of Koppen. The legend is more than just a tall tale, but something that causes local townsfolk to shudder at the thought of it. The inscription is now more than 300 years old, and it still spooks those native to the area. Enough so that the inscription's home within a church has now destroyed stained glass window. The church can be found in the market square, and it is one of the first documented records of the story of the Pied Piper. Even given the centuries-old age of this story, the town maintains that there is, allegedly, an eyewitness account from the time. In the windows of the historic building, there's the scene of the legendary piper that pushes children inside of a mountain. It explains the episode in an unambiguous way. A piper first freed the city from the rats, carrying them to the river Weser, and then, with gaudy clothes, takes the children on a mountain adjacent to the city where he pushes them in a cave from which they will never return. And what of this 800-year-old tale is really true? And what happened to the children of Hamelin? Numerous hypotheses have been made to explain the episode. Someone says that the rats never existed and were added to the story only from the 16th century. Someone believed that the Black Death was the true cause of the children's death, a theory largely discarded though, because the plague didn't hit Europe until the mid-1347. So it is very unlikely that an entire city was already afflicted over 60 years earlier. Several other theories have been put forth in an attempt to know what happened in the story. The children were taken to die in the mountains to avoid the contagion of the whole population, with the disease of Chorea Sydenham, also called the Dance of St. Vito. About this, there are references in the Chronicles of Erfurt of 1237 and in the Chronicle of Maastricht of 1278, or the children were forced to leave the city for a new children's crusade, or for a military campaign. The Crusade of Children has been the subject of extensive debate and seems to be the result of a misinterpretation of the Latin word puer, which is confused with the word pauper, which means poor. The military campaign, on the other hand, was very common at the time and often involved even the youngest. It's also possible that the children were part of a migration eastward, probably to Transylvania, and maybe the colorful man with the flute was just a really convincing real estate salesman. Another hypothesis, very interesting, came from Gernot Hussam, a local historian. The Barons Spiegelbergs, convinced Catholics, were determined to eliminate resistance to religious conversion in the area and hired a hunter with bright clothes. Had 130 children of the city of Hamelin sacrificed over a Calvary, like that of Christ, sacrificed to save the men, near the city. The ordeal could be Mount Ilth, only 15 kilometers away from the town of Hamelin, where is located the Kitchen of the Devil,
a perfect place to make sacrifices of this kind, and traditionally linked to pagan rites. In fact, the hill Oberberg is described by the oral tradition of the city as a theater of rituals and demonic parties, which were accompanied by the sound of a piper who played during the ceremonies, inviting young people to dance. Today, on the Bongo-Lossenstrasse, the street where the Pied Piper house is located, where the children were supposedly last seen, music is banned as a sign of respect. But in the rest of the city, there are everywhere rat iconography. A clock tower tells the story 3 times a day. There's a Pied Piper statue, and some bars that serve typical rat's blood cocktails. Twice a day the bells played, also the Pied Piper melody. Whatever the cause of the eerie disappearance of 1284, the children of Hamelin are certainly not forgotten, a mystery probably bound to remain so.
Before the invention of the written word, societies of the past needed a way to document their lives, to record successes and failures, much in the way we still do now. The main way these ancient communities did this was through rock carvings, drawings, and paintings. It was through these primitive illustrations, many of which have been uncovered, that we in the present learned about the lives of those who came long before us. Yet, on rare occasions, these primordial rock pictures have shown us something else entirely. They have given us more than a peek into another time or place, but shown us a story or an image that is truly mysterious. Tucked away in an isolated valley about 2 hours from Milan is a place known for its famously mysterious rock art called Valcamonica. The valley in which Valcamonica is located sits within the craggy mountainous terrain of the Central Alps. It is the largest valley in the area, situated in the eastern Lombardy region, inside the Italian province of Brescia. It's a sweeping and expansive 56 miles wide, running through fields, forests, and quiet medieval villages. These villages in the quiet parts of Europe are the ones we see in the storybooks as children, those seemingly untouched by time and the modern world. Valcamonica's villages themselves have been voted some of the most beautiful in Italy many times over. The valley is blooming with plant and flower life that makes it a special place to see. A lot of greenery found in this area is native and unique to it, meaning that it can't be found anywhere else. In 2018, UNESCO named it a World Heritage Site and added it to their list of the World Biosphere Reserves. In addition to this, the valley is rich in history, possessing numerous old castles and Roman ruins. And it has several UNESCO World Heritage Sites, but Valcamonica is perhaps the best known for having the largest, most extensive, and complete collection of prehistoric rock drawings called petroglyphs in the world. Despite the outward fascination of the art found on the rocks in Valcamonica, the Italian locals initially thought nothing of them. Most of those local to the region paid no attention to them, thinking them piety or scribbles until 1914. At this time, Gualtiero Laien, an alpinist and geographer, came across them. It was his discovery of the carvings that went previously unnoticed that thrust them into the international spotlight, drawing interest from scientists and anthropologists across the globe. There are over 140,000 formally UNESCO-recognized symbols and figures carved into the rock all over the valley, but there could possibly be between an estimated 200,000 and 300,000 of them in total, encompassing over 8,000 years of history, dating from at least the 6th to the 8th centuries BC in the Mesolithic Age, 15,000 to 5,000 BC, up through the medieval times, 476 to 1453 AD. They are a unique peek into this time before written history, with many of these carvings capturing in time images depicting the daily life and spirituality of these ancient humans, including animals, plants, and humans engaged in various scenes of everyday life, hunting, magic, religion, war, and navigation, all of them in exceptionally good condition and virtually undamaged by the years and elements, thus making them and the history they depict invaluable to the fields of prehistory, sociology, and ethnology. The expansive carvings have drawn in much curiosity and fascination since their presence became widely known. Notably, they were used as Nazi propaganda during World War II, when Germans Franz Altheim and Erika Trautmann began associating the petroglyphs with Nazi ideologies, quickly spreading the idea that they depicted a mysterious ancestral Aryan race and providing their proof of their superiority. The carvings were also used for Italian fascist propaganda, and it wasn't until after the war and in the 1950s that proper scientific research would start on them again. In 1979, the petroglyphs of Valcamonica were recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, becoming Italy's first such designated site, and the carvings have instilled wonder and speculation right up into the modern day. Yet, with such a mysterious place stuck in time, it is perhaps no surprise that there have been also many unsolved mysteries associated with it. It has not gone unnoticed that there among all the images of humans, animals, plants, and various geometric shapes are those that stand out as rather different from the rest, and not a little out of place. In particular, there are a few petroglyphs that show figures that are drawn in such a way as to make their heads seem too small in proportion with the rest of their bodies, and making it odder is that they seem to be wearing what can only be described as some sort of protective spacesuit. These suited figures also have atop their heads what looks very much like helmets that an astronaut would wear, complete with lines radiating outward as if to convey shining bright light. To make it all even more bizarre, the figures are depicted holding what looks like some sort of mysterious tools or weapons, like nothing seen in any of the other drawings. And in fact, at no other place in the history of these carvings is anything else like it seen. The impression one gets is that these are figures in astronaut suits wielding advanced tools or weapons. But of course, there is the conundrum that they are thousands of years old, long before any sort of outfit or electric lighting would be available. So what do we make of this? Why would this one set of carvings hold such enormous-looking figures so long ago? Considering their strange appearance and out-of-place nature, it is perhaps no surprise that the strange petroglyphs have been proposed as being evidence that ancient aliens once visited the area and were then depicted by the awestruck ancient people living here. However, others have proposed that the petroglyphs are merely stylistic artistic representations